Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not just looking at a topic, we're Junior. We're looking at a machine, a massive, global, incredibly complex machine that is right now trying to rebuild itself while it's moving at full speed.
And that's not an exaggeration, is it?
No, I really don't say that lightly. We've all seen the headlines. We know it's hot. We know the ice is melting. But today, we're going to do something a little different. We are looking at a very specific, very dense set of data. It's a presentation deck, and it's simply titled environmentslides.md.
It sounds a bit dry when you just say the file name like that.
Right.
But the content is, well, it's anything but. It's a really fascinating document. It moves from the absolute macro level, the planetary temperature, all the way down to the nuts and bolts of engineering. Like, what specific kind of ship do you need to carry a wind turbine blade?
Exactly. It bridges that huge gap between the world is on fire and, okay, here is the specific screwdriver we need to fix it. And so the mission for this deep dive is pretty specific. We really want to move beyond those standard headlines.
Yeah.
We want to understand the mechanics of why 2024 was such a pivotal year, a turning point, really. We want to look at the hidden costs of doing nothing, which are frankly staggering, and then look at the logistical nightmares and also the triumphs of actually trying to switch the world's main power source.
And that's the key right there. It's the logistics. It's so easy to just say, switch to green energy.
Yeah, just flip a switch.
Right. But when you look at the slides we have here, you start to realize the sheer physical magnitude of what that actually means. It involves millions of tons of steel, of copper, specialized ships, and a complete rewiring of how we even think about geography and power.
I have to admit, when I first saw climate change on our list, I had a moment where I thought, okay, we know the drill, it's getting hot. But this deck, it's different. It's got numbers in it that just made my jaw drop, and engineering challenges like this whole grid queue thing that I hadn't even really thought about before.
Yeah.
It promises that the specific numbers are actually way more interesting than the usual doom scrolling.
Well, it gives you a framework for the problem, which is what we need.
Yeah. So let's unpack this. Where do we even start?
I think we have to start with the report card. We need to establish exactly where we are right now. And the data from 2024 provides a very stark, very clear starting point for that.
Right. Slide 2, this is the headline that I think defines the era we just walked into. The slide says 2024 marks the first year exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming.
Yes, and we really need to pause on that number. 1.5 degrees Celsius. For years, for decades, really, scientists, policymakers, the UN, everyone involved in the Paris Agreement, they've all been talking about 1.5 C as the limit.
It was the guardrail.
It was the guardrail. It was the ceiling we were trying not to crash through, the safety rail. And according to this data, in 2024, for the first time across a full calendar year, global temperatures have likely exceeded that threshold above pre-industrial levels.
It's weird because we've heard that number so many times it almost feels abstract.
Yeah.
Like a speed limit on a highway where everyone's already going 5 over anyway.
Yeah.
But to actually cross it, that feels really significant. Does this mean game over?
It doesn't mean the world ends tomorrow. No. It's not a cliff edge where everything instantly falls off.
Okay.
But it is deeply, deeply significant. It's both a psychological and a physical boundary. Think of it like a fever. If your body temperature goes up 1 degree, you feel terrible, right? Or maybe you take a day off work.
Sure.
If it goes up 1.5 degrees, your bodily systems start to really stress. Your enzymes don't work as well. You are entering a territory that human civilization hasn't really had to deal with before. It makes 2024 the warmest year on record, sure. But more importantly, it signals that the future scenarios we've been modeling,
The ones we talked about for 2030 or 2040.
exactly, those are now the current reality.
So the future arrived early.
Yeah.
That's the real reality check here. We're living inside the model now.
Yeah, you are.
But then I flipped to slide 4, and that's where the economic reality hit me. I think this is the number that will stick with everyone listening. The deck says environmental damage is costing the world $5 billion per hour.
It's a number that just stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
$5 billion per hour. I tried to do the math in my head on this. That's $120 billion a day. That's over $40 trillion a year? That is roughly half of global GDP. That just seems impossible. How do they even calculate that? Where is all that money vanishing to?
It's a comprehensive figure, and the source does break it down. It's not just one thing. It's an accumulation of what economists call externalities costs that aren't usually written on a receipt when you go to the store.
Okay.
It comes from things like unsustainable food production. It comes from the subsidies and health costs that are associated with fossil fuel production, and broadly, the economic damage caused by biodiversity loss.
So when we say damage, we're not just talking about, say, a hurricane wiping out a city's infrastructure, although I'm sure that's part of it.
Oh, that's definitely part of it, but it's much more insidious than just disaster cleanup. Think about agriculture. When you degrade the land so it can't grow crops anymore, that lost revenue is in the number.
I see.
When you lose pollinators, bees, and other insects because of pesticide use or habitat loss, and suddenly farmers have to pay for artificial pollination or they just suffer significantly lower yields, that's in the number. It's measuring the destruction of natural capital. We are, in essence, burning the furniture to heat the house.
That's a crucial reframing, because usually we talk about climate action as, saving the polar bears or preserving nature for its own sake. It's framed as this charity or altruism. But this number 5 billion an hour, it frames it as stopping a massive financial hemorrhage.
Precisely. We are bleeding money. The argument completely shifts from can we afford to fix this to can we honestly afford not to. If you were running a business and you knew you were losing $5 billion an hour because of a leaky pipe or a glitch in your software, you wouldn't sit around debating if the plumber was too expensive.
No, you'd fix the pipe immediately.
You would declare an emergency instantly. You'd do whatever it takes.
And yet here we are, still debating the cost of the plumber. And you mentioned biodiversity loss as part of that cost. The slides point out that 1 million species are threatened with extinction.
That's right. And again, we need to look at that through an economic lens, not just a sentimental one. It's easy to feel sad about it, but the economic impact is concrete. Ecosystems provide services, clean water, pollination, soil stability, flood control.
Right.
Mangroves protect coastlines from storm surges far better than any man-made seawall. Forests filter our water for free. These are services we get from nature. If those systems collapse because the species that run them die out, the cost to replace them artificially is, well, it's astronomical if it's even possible at all.
It's like firing the entire maintenance staff of a huge building.
Yeah.
And then wondering why the roof leaks, the trash is piling up, and the foundation is starting to crack.
That's a very good way to put it. We are effectively firing the planet's maintenance staff and then paying an absurd premium to try and do the maintenance ourselves, and poorly at that.
Okay, so we've got the temperature record, we've got the financial bleed, but there's another layer to this report card that I think gets ignored a lot, probably because it's invisible, the silent crisis.
The air quality, yes, this is from slide 3 in the deck.
And the stat here is just terrifying. 99% of the global population lives in areas that exceed WHO air quality guidelines. I mean, basically, almost everyone on Earth is breathing bad air.
It's effectively universal exposure. Unless you live in a very, very remote part of the Arctic or maybe the middle of the Pacific Ocean, you are likely breathing air that is technically unsafe, according to the World Health Organization. It democratizes the danger in a way that very few other things do.
And the consequences aren't just, a cough or a bad smell from a nearby factory. The data shows 8.1 million deaths in 2021 were attributed to this.
Yeah. And to put that number in context, that makes air pollution the second leading risk factor for death globally.
The second.
The second. It's right up there with high blood pressure and smoking. It kills more people every year than malaria and HIV combined.
That is insane. The second leading risk factor. We worry about shark attacks or plane crashes or all these rare diseases, but just the simple act of breathing is killing millions of people.
And it connects directly to the root causes we see later in the presentation. Look at the transport sector. The slides highlight that the transport sector alone is responsible for about 25% of EU emissions. But it's not just the carbon dioxide that warms the planet. It's the nitrogen oxides, the sulfur, the particulate matter, the soot that comes directly out of those tailpipes.
So the same car that's pushing us over that 1.5-degree line is also pumping out the stuff that's damaging our lungs right now, today.
Exactly. It's a double whammy. You have the long-term sort of existential threat of warming and the immediate acute threat of toxicity. And this creates a very strong argument for transition because even if you hypothetically didn't care about climate change at all or didn't believe in it,
Right.
the health argument alone is completely overwhelming. 8.1 million deaths is a crisis by any possible definition.
It really connects the dots. You can't separate the tailpipe from the temperature or from the lungs. It's all one system. Okay, so that's the report card. And honestly, it's a failing grade. We're hot, we're losing money at a rate of $5 billion an hour, and we're breathing poison. It sounds grim.
It is grim. If the presentation ended there, we'd all just go home and give up.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's why the second part of this deck is so important. Because part one is the problem, part two is the response. And the response is actually happening much faster than most people realize.
This is the great pivot. I love this section because, honestly, I needed some good news. Slide 7 talks about the renewable revolution. And it says that global renewable capacity additions jumped by 50% in 2023.
A 50% jump in a single year. That's just extraordinary growth. In industrial terms, that is a boom. Usually, energy infrastructure changes at a glacial pace.
Right, it takes decades.
Decades to shift infrastructure. To see a 50% spike in capacity addition in 1 year tells you that the market has fundamentally shifted. We're not just nudging the needle anymore, we are moving it hard.
And it says it's almost entirely solar PV and wind. They account for 95% of that growth. Why those two specifically? Why not, say, hydro or geothermal?
It really boils down to two things: modularity and cost. There's a term we use called LCOE, levelized cost of energy. Over the last decade, the cost to manufacture a solar panel has just plummeted. The efficiency of wind turbines has skyrocketed. They have simply become cheaper to build and operate than the alternatives in many, many parts of the world.
So it's not just because everyone suddenly decided to be eco-friendly.
No, not at all. Money is driving this. It's capitalism at work. When it becomes cheaper to save the planet than to destroy it, you see this kind of explosive growth. Investors are just following the return on investment.
That's the tipping point we've been waiting for so long. And there's a prediction in here for 2025 that really blew my mind. Slide 8 says renewables are set to overtake coal as the largest source of global electricity generation by early 2025.
Think about the history of the last 2 centuries. Coal powered the Industrial Revolution. It built the modern world. It fueled the trains, the factories, the navies of empires. It has been the undisputed king of energy generation for a very, very long time.
It's been the default.
It's been the default. For renewables to take that crown, I mean, we are living through a historical pivot. It marks the end of the Victorian era of energy and the beginning of a new one.
And it's happening right now. We're literally watching the guard change. This isn't some prediction for 2050 anymore.
We are, and there's a really interesting nuance here that the slides point out, which I found fascinating. A hidden benefit of this switch. It's not just about carbon, it's about water.
Oh, yes. Slide 11. I feel like nobody ever talks about this.
Yep.
The water conservation advantage.
Hmm.
Can you explain this? Because I think most people, like me, just think of electricity as wires, not water.
It's a critical detail. Traditional power plants, coal, natural gas, nuclear, they're what we call thermal plants. They work by boiling water to create steam, which then spins a turbine.
Okay, basic physics.
Right. But to make that work efficiently, you need to cool the steam back down into water to cycle it through again. And that requires massive cooling systems. They suck up billions of gallons of water from rivers and lakes just to absorb all that waste heat.
I've seen those big, hourglass-shaped cooling towers at power plants. I guess I never really thought about how much water they're actually processing.
They are incredibly thirsty. In times of drought, which are becoming more common, we've actually seen nuclear and coal plants have to shut down or reduce their output. Yes, because the river level was too low or the water itself was too hot to properly cool the plant. It creates this real vulnerability in the system. Now compare that to a wind turbine or a solar panel. How much water does a wind turbine need to generate electricity?
The slide says virtually none.
Virtually zero. It captures kinetic energy directly from the air, doesn't boil anything. So in a world that is getting hotter, where droughts are becoming more frequent, and water scarcity is a real geopolitical threat, shifting to wind and solar solves 2 problems at once. You get the energy you need without draining the local water supply.
That is a huge win-win. It's like buying a car that not only drives itself, but also cleans your house. You're solving the energy crisis and helping to solve the water crisis at the exact same time.
It just connects back to that idea of efficiency. The old way-burning stuff to boil water is becoming obsolete not just because of the smoke, but because it's clunky and incredibly resource-heavy. The new way capturing the wind or the sun directly is just more elegant engineering.
Okay, so we had this massive surge in renewables. Solar and wind are taking over. Coal is on its way out. We're saving water. If I just stopped reading the deck right there, I think, great, problem solved. Let's go have a celebratory drink. But then we get to part 3.
The hurdles.
Yeah. Why is this harder than it looks? Because if it's cheaper and it's better, why aren't we done yet? Why is the world still running so much on oil and gas?
Because the physical reality of changing the world's entire infrastructure is incredibly, incredibly difficult.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about intent. It's about logistics. It's about gravity and friction and steel.
Slide 12 gets into the heavy lifting. And it literally means heavy lifting. It talks about the logistics of scale.
It does. And let's talk about wind farms for a second, specifically offshore wind.
Yeah.
We're not talking about putting a solar panel on your roof here. We're talking about installing absolutely massive structures in the middle of the ocean. The slides mention using jackets and tripods.
Yeah, what are those? They sound like clothing and camera gear.
In this context, they're titans of engineering. A jacket foundation is a giant steel lattice structure. Imagine the base of the Eiffel Tower, but built to be underwater, that sits on the seabed to hold the turbine up. A tripod is exactly what it sounds like, a massive three-legged support structure. These things weigh thousands of tons.
Wow.
And they have to withstand hurricanes, saltwater corrosion, and the constant battering of waves for 30 years.
And you have to somehow get them out to the middle of the North Sea or off the coast of the Atlantic?
Exactly, and that's just the base. Then you have the turbine itself. The blades on modern offshore turbines can be longer than a football field.
One blade.
Just one blade. You need to lift that blade 400 or 500 feet into the air and bolt it onto a hub, all while you're floating on a ship that is bobbing in the waves. The precision required is just mind-boggling.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. And the slide mentions specialized heavy lift vessels.
This is a major, major bottleneck. You can't just use a normal cargo ship for this. You need a specific kind of ship that is designed to jack itself up out of the water. These ships drop massive legs down to the seafloor and literally lift their entire hull out of the water to create a stable platform so the crane doesn't move.
So it turns into a temporary island?
A temporary island with a crane on it tall enough to reach the top of the Empire State Building. And the problem is, there simply aren't enough of these vessels in existence to meet the global demand.
That's such a specific problem. So we have the technology to make the turbine exists, but we might not have enough of the right kind of boats to go and build the power plants.
It's a classic supply chain constraint. And it's not just the boats, it's just getting the blades to the port in the first place. Have you ever seen a wind turbine blade being transported on a highway?
I have once.
Yeah.
It was surreal. It took up like 3 lanes of traffic. They had police escorts, and they had to take down street signs just to get it around a corner. It looked like a part from a spaceship had crash landed.
Now imagine trying to move thousands of those. You need specialized trucks. You often have to reinforce bridges because they're so heavy, or completely redesign roundabouts. The logistics of scale are just daunting. We're trying to rebuild the entire energy system, and we're finding out that our roads and our ships aren't quite big enough for the job.
Okay, so that's the physical barrier, moving these monsters. But then there's this invisible barrier that I found even more frustrating. Slide 13, the grid connection queue.
This is one of the most underreported stories in the entire energy transition. It's the traffic jam of the century.
The stat here is just, it's mind-boggling. Over 1,650 gigawatts of renewable projects are currently stuck in advanced stage grid connection queues.
Let's just try to unpack that number for a second. 1,650 gigawatts, that is roughly the total installed electricity capacity of the entire United States, plus a good chunk of Europe.
Wait, say that again. So we have enough power plants already planned and waiting in line to power the entire U.S., and they can't plug in.
That is correct. The projects are developed, the financing might be there, the land is leased, the developers are ready to go to work. But the grid, the wires, the substations, the management systems, it cannot handle them yet.
Why? I mean, is it just red tape? Is it paperwork? What's the holdup?
It's partly bureaucracy, yes. The permitting process can take a very long time. But it's also a physics problem. The grid we have today was designed for a completely different era.
Right.
It was designed for a few big, steady coal or nuclear plants that were located near cities and pushed power out one way to the customers. Now we're trying to plug in thousands of smaller variable wind and solar farms, often in really remote locations, where the wind blows the hardest or the sun shines the brightest, but where there aren't any big power lines.
It's like buying 1,000 brand new Ferraris and then realizing you only have a single-lane dirt driveway to your house.
That's a very good analogy, and there's another layer to it. Stability. The slide mentions intermittency.
Right. The wind doesn't blow all the time. The sun doesn't shine at night. We all know that.
So the grid operator has a really difficult problem. If they plug in all the solar power and then a big cloud comes over, the power output drops almost instantly. If they don't have a backup ready to go in a split second, the whole grid can crash. Blackout.
Okay.
So before they let you connect your new wind farm, they need to do studies to know the grid can handle those swings. They need to build bigger wires and smarter systems to manage it all, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of money.
So the queue isn't just people standing in a line filling out forms. It's an engineering safety valve. We literally can't plug them in until the whole system is upgraded to be smarter and stronger.
Exactly. We need to upgrade the motherboard of the planet's electrical system before we can plug in all the new components. And right now, the motherboard is lagging way behind the components.
And while we're on the topic of things that are hard to fix, let's talk about the hard-to-abate sectors.
Yeah.
That's on slide 9. Because electricity is great, but you can't run a container ship on a AA battery.
Not yet, certainly. This is the reality check for the whole electrify everything slogan. There are some parts of our economy-heavy industry, like steel and cement manufacturing and long-haul transport like aviation and shipping, that are very, very difficult to just plug into a wall. The energy density of batteries just isn't there yet for a flight across the Pacific.
So what's the plan for those? The slide mentions a few things: biofuels, biogas, and hydrogen.
These are the alternative molecules. If you can't use electrons, which is electricity, you need a molecule that can burn cleanly. Hydrogen is the big hope for things like steel production. Today, we use coal to strip the oxygen away from iron ore to make steel. That process releases massive amounts of CO2.
Right.
But you can use hydrogen to do the same chemical reaction, and the only byproduct is water, H2O.
That sounds like magic. I mean, why aren't we doing that everywhere right now?
Because making green hydrogen, which means using renewable energy to split water molecules, is still very expensive and very energy intensive. And then transporting hydrogen is tricky. It's a tiny molecule that leaks out of things very easily, and it can make metal pipes brittle over time.
And for planes, we can't put a huge hydrogen tank on a 747 yet, I'm guessing.
Not easily, no.
Yeah.
So for aviation, we're looking more at biofuels, what they call sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. Basically making jet fuel out of plants or waste cooking oil. But as the slide notes, these technologies are all lagging way behind. While solar panels are booming, the green hydrogen and biofuel revolution is still kind of in the starting blocks.
Now, we've got logistical nightmares with giant ships, we've got grid jams holding back terawatts of power, and we have missing tech for our airplanes and factories. It gets a lot of friction. But it gets even stickier, doesn't it? Because now we have to talk about the people and the land. Part 4. The trade-offs and tensions.
This is where the rubber really meets the road, socially. It's one thing to support clean energy in the abstract. It's a whole different thing when it's next door.
Slide 14 brings up the NMBY factor. Not in my backyard.
It's a very human reaction. We all want clean energy. We all want to stop that $5 billion per hour bleeding. But do we want a 600-foot wind turbine visible from our kitchen window? Do we want new high-voltage transmission lines cutting through our local forest?
I think most people, if they're being honest, would say, yes, save the planet, but maybe put the turbine in the next town over.
Exactly. And that friction, that local opposition, it slows everything down. The visual impact, the noise, these are real concerns for communities. You can't just dismiss them. If you try to ignore the local community, you get protests, you get lawsuits, and those projects end up dying in that grid queue we just talked about. It turns into this battle of values, local aesthetics versus global survival.
A clash between the global good and the local reality. And it's not just people complaining about the view, is it? There's an ecological nuance here, too. The slide mentions bird and bat collisions.
This is an uncomfortable truth that we have to talk about. Renewable energy infrastructure does have an ecological footprint. Wind turbines do kill birds and bats. Solar farms can take up large amounts of land that might have been important habitat. We have to be honest about that.
But the expert rebuttal on the slide is interesting. It says you have to compare these impacts to the alternative.
Right. You have to look at the net impact. It's about scale. Yes, a single turbine might kill a bird. But climate change, which is driven by fossil fuels, is threatening to wipe out entire species. It destroys habitats on a continental scale through droughts, fires, and shifting temperature zones. So the damage from fossil fuels is exponentially, orders of magnitude higher. A single coal plant kills far more birds via pollution and habitat destruction than a wind farm ever will.
So it's about choosing the lesser of two evils, or I guess the path of least destruction.
It's about mitigation. We can site wind farms better to avoid major migration routes. We can use new radar technology to slow turbines down when a flock of birds or a colony of bats is active nearby. But we cannot pretend that clean energy has zero footprint. Everything we build has a cost. There's no such thing as a free lunch in thermodynamics or in ecology.
And there's one last trap in this section that I found really fascinating. Slide 6 and slide 15 touch on this idea of the consumption trap in the supply chain.
The consumption trap is the elephant in the room of this whole conversation. As long as our idea of economic growth is tied to resource depletion, we have a fundamental problem. Even if the energy we use is green, if we just keep consuming more and more stuff, we're still digging up the earth for minerals to make that stuff.
To build the wind turbines and the electric cars and the batteries, we need things. We need rare earth metals, copper, lithium, cobalt.
And that leads directly to the supply chain vulnerability. Slide 15 points out that the manufacturing capacity, particularly for wind turbines and the raw materials they need, is highly concentrated in specific regions.
It says China, mostly.
Correct. A very significant portion of the global supply chain for renewables, from processing the lithium to building the solar wafers to manufacturing the actual turbine components, it runs through China. And that creates a geopolitical risk.
So we're essentially trading a dependency on petrostates, countries that have the oil, for a new dependency on the countries that have the minerals and the factories.
In a way, yes. It's a shift in dependency. We're moving from what we call a fuel-intensive system, where you constantly need to buy oil and gas to keep the lights on, to a material-intensive system. In this new system, you need a lot of stuff up front to build the machine, but once it's built, the fuel, the wind and the sun, is free and it's local.
Right.
But getting all that stuff up front is where the new bottleneck lies.
High raw material costs, manufacturing concentration. It's all connected. It feels like we're trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces themselves keep changing shape.
That's a fair assessment. It's a very dynamic system, but we have to look at the trajectory. We have to look at where we're going, not just the problems of today.
So let's try to wrap this all up. We've gone through the crisis, the heat and the $5 billion an hour cost. We've gone through the pivot, that massive renewable boom. We've seen the hurdles, the grid and the logistics, and we've seen the trade-offs. What's the path forward? The outro.
The conclusion from the slides is pretty clear. Slide 16 references the goal that came out of COP28, which is to triple renewable capacity globally.
Triplet. That's massive. If we are struggling with the grid queue now, how on earth do we handle triple the power?
Well, the slides give us a to-do list for governments.
Yep.
First, they need to streamline permitting. We have to clear that 1,650 gigawatt queue. You simply cannot have vital projects waiting 5-10 years to get connected. We need to make the paperwork move as fast as the crisis is moving.
Right. You have to cut the red tape. Treat it like the emergency that it actually is.
Secondly, invest heavily in grid infrastructure. Build the wires. Build the interconnections between countries and regions. We need a kind of supergrid that can move wind power from the coast where it's windy to the sunny interior and move the solar power back the other way. And third, support innovation in storage. We desperately need better batteries and other forms of long-duration storage to handle that intermittency so we don't have to worry when the sun goes down.
It sounds like a lot of work. It sounds incredibly expensive. But then again, when you look at the alternative...
The alternative is that report card we started with.
Exactly. It really feels like a race, doesn't it?
Yeah.
On one side, you have that silent crisis, the pollution, the warming, the $5 billion per hour bleeding out of the global economy. And on the other side, you have this logistical revolution, the giant ships, the new grids, the new technology, all trying to catch up.
It is absolutely a race. We're breaking records in heat, but we're also breaking records in solutions. A 50% growth in renewables is a record. The question is simply about speed. Can the solutions scale faster than the problems escalate?
And I think that leads us to the final thought. We know renewables are set to overtake coal in 2025. That's happening. It's baked in. But here's the question for you listening right now. We talked about the NIMBY factor. We talked about the massive new infrastructure we need.
The transmission lines, the turbines, the mines for the minerals.
Right. Are we as a society ready to accept the visual and the physical changes to our landscapes that are required to stop that $5 billion per hour bleeding? Because we all want the problem solved. We all want the air to be clean. But are we willing to look at the solution every single day? The technology is there. The economics are now there. But is the social willingness to host the infrastructure there?
That is the defining question of the next decade. It's not just about engineering anymore. It's about acceptance.
Something to think about the next time you see a wind farm on the horizon. Instead of thinking that kind of ruins the view, maybe think, that's saving us $5 billion. Thanks for diving in with us.
Thank you.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.